Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Gail in Kansas City, Lucy in Minnesota, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, Belle in Texas. And hi, I'm in Florida. Frank in San Pedro, Elise in Virginia, Moishi in Brooklyn, Lester in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Double daf today as we open a new Mishna, Mishna number 2 here in chapter 5. And recalling that in this chapter, we're finally getting into the basics of what are the offerings, not in terms of why is somebody bringing an offering, but how are they brought, how is the blood presented, which really achieves the goal of the offering, right? That goal is achieved when the blood is sprinkled. So in this chapter, we're going in descending order of sanctity. We started with the offerings of Yom Kippur, and for communal error, the offerings whose blood was sprinkled inside the sanctuary in the Holy Temple. Now we move on to the next one down, and that's going to be the sin offerings. The sin offerings. And the ones after that will be the burnt offerings, right? Descending level of sanctity. Double daf today, pages 53 and 54 here in Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud. Mishnah number 2 of chapter 5 begins at the very bottom of page 52b. These are the laws of the communal and individual sin offerings. These are the communal offerings. The goats of the new moon, right? The monthly new moon means the beginning of each new month. And of the festivals, right? The special offerings brought on Rosh Chodesh, the new day at the beginning of each month, and the festivals. And their slaughter is in the north of the temple courtyard, and the collection of their blood in a service vessel is in the north, and their blood requires 4 placements on the 4 corners of the altar. And how did the priest do so? He ascended the ramp of the altar. Now, this model that I used to show you, it's nice because it's 3D, but you know it's very limited in terms of detail and scale, and there's a lot that we're not going to be able to see in this model, and we're going to just use our imaginations. But in terms of some basics, right, the temple faces east, so this is east. That's west. And what does that mean? East, south, right? So this is south, right? And we know that this is north, pointing up. And actually we know that because if we look there, above the ramp, right, so there's the ramp and the altar, which is in front of the temple. And this is a little bit misleading because things were a lot bigger and less crowded than we see in this little wooden model. But the altar is toward the south. The north, you see all those kind of little half circles kind of printed on the ground. Those represent iron rings that animals were tied to before they were slaughtered. Right? And so that's why the slaughter is happening in the north. That's the area where the slaughter is happening. Now there's the altar and the ramp, and you can, not very well see that there is a base to the altar, and that represents the base where the blood is going to be poured out after the sprinklings have been done. On the corners of the altar, you can see that there's just a little bit that sticks up from the altar itself. If you're looking at the altar, right over here, this is the altar right here, right? You could see that. And the four corners of it stick up a little bit because we're definitely going to be talking about the corners of the altar. Now, when I'm talking about the limitations of this model, the altar was quite large, right? Quite large. All in all, 15 cubits high. At the top, it's not like the pyre, the altar pyre, the arrangement of wood on which the offerings that were burned on the altar, on that wood fire above the altar. It didn't take up the whole altar. Right? So there was an arrangement of wood, and we'll get to that, I think, more tomorrow. But the wood fire was only a portion of the altar. And more to the point for today, when we hear that they were sprinkling blood on the corners of the altar, they actually had to get up off the floor of the Holy Temple. Not walk up all the way onto the altar itself and then kind of like reach over the rail, so to speak, and down below sprinkle for those kinds of offerings that require sprinkling above the red line, the upper altar. As we know, those are animal sin offerings, whereas bird sin offerings were sprinkled below that red line, so the lower half of the altar. But to reach that upper half of the altar, there was a special sort of like a walkway around the altar and about halfway up. Right, it's about halfway up. We'll talk more about that, where the priests, there was a special ramp just for that, right? So there was a ramp for going all the way up onto the altar when they were bringing sacrificial portions that had to be burned on the altar pyre. And there was a separate ramp that didn't go all the way to the top of the altar, but only halfway up, and then this walkway around the altar. And the purpose of that walkway around the altar was just so that the priest could sprinkle the blood in the correct location on the corners of the altar. So let's keep reading. Okay, so for these communal and individual sin offerings, there were the goats of the new moon and the festivals, and the slaughter is in the north of the temple courtyard, and the collection of the blood in a service vessel happened in the north, and the blood requires 4 placements on the 4 corners of the altar. And how did the priest do so? He ascended the ramp of the altar, now we're on 53a, and he turned right, right? So you can see that a little bit. Right, that kind of sloped ramp, which is in the south, leading up to the altar. And then, like, he wasn't walking on the top, right? He was walking along the outside, right, on this special walkway for this purpose. But the point is, he would walk up from the south, make a right, and then that means he's going to hit the southeast corner. Then he's going to go north, and he's going to hit the northeast corner. Then he's going to go west and hit the northwest corner. And then he's going to go south again and hit the southwest corner. And then what's left, he's going to pour the remainder on the southern base of the altar, right? So let's just read that. He ascended the ramp and turned right to the surrounding ledge. That's what we're talking about. And he continued east, and he came to the southeast corner, and he sprinkled the blood of the sin offering there. And then to the northeast corner, and he sprinkled the blood there. And then to the southwest corner, and then to the northwest corner, and he sprinkled the blood there. And then to the southwest corner, where he performed the 4th sprinkling. And then he descended from the altar, and he would pour the remainder of the blood on the southern base of the altar. And the meat portions of the offering are eaten within the curtains, which means in the temple courtyard. by the males of the priesthood, right? The priests, but their families don't eat sacrificial portions. And they are eaten, prepared in any form of food preparation on the day the offering is sacrificed and during the night that follows until midnight. That's Mishnah number 2. Now the Gemara. How does the priest perform the rite of sprinkling the blood on the corners of the altar? There is a dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One says that the priest places the blood within a cubit on the side, or a cubit, let's start again. One of them says, right, this dispute is between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One of them says that the priest places the blood within a cubit on this side or a cubit on that side of the corner. He places the blood wherever he wants, provided that it is within 1 cubit of the corner of the altar. And the other one says that he sprinkles the blood on the outer edge of the corner of the altar, and it flows down on both sides of the altar, right? So when you have a corner, and this is not what we're talking about, I'm just using the corner of the building, right? Because the altar's too small in this model. But when you have to hit a corner, right, are you literally hitting the corner where the two sides meet? Or do you just have to be within a cubit of that? I think the halakha is within a cubit of that. You don't actually have to hit the corner itself. And the Gemara comments, according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, who says that the sprinkling of the blood of a sin offering itself is performed only on the actual corner. The 1 by 1 cubit projection above each corner of the altar, everyone agrees that the blood may be sprinkled anywhere on the corner, and this will be a fulfillment of the verse, Leviticus 4:25, where it says, "And put it upon the corners of the altar of burnt offering." When they disagree, it is only according to the opinion of Rebbe, who holds that the blood may be sprinkled anywhere above the red line on the edge of the altar. One of them holds that the blood may be sprinkled on the cubit on this side or that side of the edge, because a cubit on this side or that side of the edge is still considered to be on the corner. And the other sage holds that on its edge, yes, it is fit, but any further to the side is not. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to the opinion that 1 cubit on either side of the edge is still considered on the edge from a baraisa. With regard to communal sin offerings and individual sin offerings, how is the placement of their blood on the altar performed? Again, keeping in mind that when a sin offering is brought, now sin offerings are brought to do what? Atone for a sin. Recall, that's always an unwitting violation. If you sin intentionally, you don't bring a sin offering. You can achieve atonement, but you're going to have to pray for God to guide you, to help you understand why you committed that sin, to grow so you wouldn't commit that sin again, all kinds of stuff to make an atonement. But even when the temple is standing, you don't bring a sin offering for an intentional violation of a prohibition. When do you bring it? For the unwitting, that you made a mistake. Somehow you were negligent and you came to make that sin, to commit that sin. It wasn't circumstances beyond your control. You were just kind of negligent. You didn't realize you were doing it. So then you have to bring a sin offering. This only counts when the temple is standing. So then you have to go to Jerusalem. You have to bring this animal that is consecrated for this purpose. It has to be slaughtered. Knowing, right, the person who's slaughtering it has to know that it's because you committed a sin and you brought this animal as a sin offering. All that intentionality has to be there. And then the blood, as it is slaughtered, is collected by a priest in a service vessel and conveyed to the altar, and then sprinkled by a priest, a fit priest, with the correct intention on these corners of the altar, right? And then later, there's a portion of the meat that is going to be burned on the altar and another portion that's going to be eaten by priests. But even if it's not burned on the altar, even if the remaining blood is not poured on the base of the altar, even if the priests don't eat it, it's the sprinkling on the corner that achieves the atonement for you, the person bringing the sin offering. Right, so this getting it right, understand exactly what the requirements of sprinkling on the corners is an indispensable part of achieving atonement by bringing a sin offering. So that's why we're paying special attention to it. Okay, so with regard to communal sin offerings and individual sin offerings, how is the placement of their blood on the altar performed? The priest would ascend the ramp of the altar and turn right to the surrounding edge, and he continued east, and he would come to the southeast corner. And he would then dip with his right finger, the most dexterous of the right hand, so the index finger, the blood that is in the bowl, and he would gather the blood with his thumb above and his smallest finger below. Sounds like something like this. Get some blood on that finger so that it would remain on his finger. And then he would sprinkle the blood and move his finger down on the outer edge of the corner until he would finish sprinkling all the blood that was on his finger. And he would act similarly at each and every corner. This baraisa states explicitly that the blood must be sprinkled on the actual edge. So how can we say, according to this other opinion, which actually became the law, within 1 cubit of the edge? And the Gemara answers, this is what the baraisa is saying: the optimal manner to perform the mitzvah is to sprinkle the blood on the very edge of the corner. But if he did the sprinkling on the cubit, within a cubit on this side or within a cubit on that side, we have no problem with it. He has fulfilled the mitzvah. And the Gemara discusses the aforementioned dispute. What is the opinion of Rebbe and what is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon? This is, as it is taught in a baraisa, the blood that must be placed on the upper half of the altar, for example, the blood of a sin offering, is placed anywhere from the red line that circumscribed the middle of the altar and above. Why was there a red line around the outside of the altar? Because some offerings needed to be on the upper half of the altar, and some sprinkling had to be on the upper half of the altar, and some, the sprinkling had to be on the lower half of the altar. We've derived that elsewhere. But generally speaking, animal sin offerings above the red line, bird sin offerings below the red line. And why the red line? Just to tell you that this is halfway. So if you're above the red line, you're in the upper half. If you're below the red line, you're in the lower half. Where was I? We have no problem. So the Gemara discusses the aforementioned dispute. What is the opinion of Rebbe and what is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon? And this is as it is taught in that baraisa, that the blood must be placed on the upper half. For example, the blood of a sin offering, and that is anywhere above the red line. And the blood that must be placed in the lower half of the altar is placed anywhere from the red line or below. This is the statement of Rebbe. Right? When we say Rebbe, we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is the one who caused the Mishna to be set down, to be redacted around the year 200 of the Common Era. And he was the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin. Now the baraisa continues, and the year 200, that's already 130 years after the temple was destroyed. Right? So he's making rulings on the halacha. They figured out what the halacha is, right? But that was not set down and sort of finalized until 130 years after the temple was destroyed. Rebbe himself probably never saw, for sure, never saw the temple in action, right? He was born after it was destroyed. Now, the baraisa continues that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, says, in what case is this statement said? It is said with regard to a bird burnt offering, as its blood may be placed anywhere above the red line, but with regard to an animal sin offering, the placement itself may be performed only on the actual corner of the altar. This is based on the verse that states, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it upon the corners of the altar of burnt offering, which he's reading as you have to actually hit the corner. Rabbi Abahu says, what is the reason for the opinion of Rebbe? As it is written, and the altar shall be 4 cubits, and from the altar and above there shall be 4 corners. And the Gemara asks, was the altar only 4 cubits wide? Rav Ada bar Ahava said in the total area of the 4 corners, which were each 1 square cubit, was 4 cubits. Right? Each corner was a square cubit, this part that stuck up above the level of the altar. The altar itself was much larger than that. Now, the altar in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, right after Solomon built the temple, was a much larger altar than the portable altar that went around with the portable tabernacle when the children of Israel first built it after having received the Torah at Mount Sinai. It's going to have the same sort of requirement. It's going to meet the same requirements, but it's going to be on a different scale, a much different scale. 4 cubits. Now, the Gemara asks, was the area of the corners 4 square cubits? If the 4 corners would be placed together, the area would only be 2 square cubits. Rather, 2 square, right? 2 square is 4 cubits. Rather, say that the domain of the corners is 4 cubits. In other words, the verse means that the blood may be sprinkled up to 4 cubits beneath the actual corners of the altar. Totally different reading. Now, we learned in the Mishna there, tractate Midos 35b, a red line circumscribed the altar in the middle to separate between the area of the blood that must be placed on the upper part of the altar and the area for the blood that must be placed on the lower part of the altar. And the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? And Rav Acha bar Rav Katina said it is derived from a verse, as it is stated, and you shall put it under the ledge round the altar beneath, and the net will reach halfway up the altar. That's Exodus 27:5. So the Torah provided for a separation on the altar, to separate between the area for the blood that is placed on the upper part of the altar and the area for the blood that is placed on the lower part of the altar. New topic. The Mishnah teaches he would pour, right, after having done the 4 sprinklings for a sin offering on each corner, one on each corner, then he would pour the remainder of the blood on the southern base of the altar. Right? The ramp is in the south, so he walked up from the south, he walked all the way around, and then he finishes back in the south. So if he's going to now pour it on the base, it's going to be on the southern base. And the Brisa challenges, do you say that this is referring to the southern base, or is it referring only to the western base? And the Gemara suggests, and one can derive the meaning of this unspecified phrase from the meaning of the explicit phrase as follows. You said that one can derive the location of the priest's descent from the ramp of the external altar after sprinkling the blood of the sin offering by comparing it to his exit from the sanctuary with the blood that remained after having sprinkled blood inside the sanctuary, which we discussed as part of the discussion, the Gemara on Mishnah 1 of this chapter. Right? Where did he pour out the blood? As soon as he left the sanctuary, right, he's walking east and he's going to come to the western base of the altar. And that's the first base he encounters, and he pours the remainder of the blood there. Right? The verse states, with regard to the bull offering of the high priest and all the remaining blood of the bull, he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And just as upon his exit from the sanctuary, the priest pours the remainder of the blood on the side closest to him, which for that situation would be the western side, so too upon his descent from the ramp of the external altar after sprinkling blood from the sin offering, he pours blood on the closest side to him, which is the southern side. And it is taught in another Baraisa that Rabbi Yishmael says, this and that, both the remainder of the blood sprinkled inside the sanctuary and the remainder of the blood sprinkled on the external altar are poured on the western base of the altar. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, this and that are both poured on the southern base of the altar. And the Gemara clarifies, granted, according to the one who says that the blood is poured on the western base of the altar, it is clear how he derived this law. He holds that one can derive the meaning of an unspecified phrase from the meaning of the explicit phrase. Therefore, just as the remainder of the blood sprinkled inside the sanctuary is poured on the western base of the external altar, because it's the first edge he encounters when he leaves the sanctuary, the same is done with the remainder of the blood sprinkled on the external altar, because when he descends, the closest edge to him is the southern side. But according to the one who says that the blood is poured on the southern base of the altar, what is the reason? Rabbi Asi said, coming out of the sanctuary, why would he pour that blood? Right, from the internal sprinklings in that sanctuary, why would he come out and pour it on the southern side of the external altar? Rabbi Asi said, this Tana holds that the entire external altar stands in the north of the temple courtyard. Therefore, the southern base is in the center of the courtyard, opposite the entrance of the sanctuary, and this is what the verse is referring to when it states, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. that would be, even though it's perpendicular, or it's parallel to his path as he leaves the sanctuary. I guess what he would come to first is the southwestern corner, but maybe he's going to hit the south edge of it. Therefore, the southern base is at the center of the courtyard opposite the entrance of the sanctuary. And this is what the verse is referring to when it says, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, in Leviticus 4:7. Now, the Gemara presents another formulation of Rabbi Asi's explanation. The entire entrance of the sanctuary stands in the south of the altar. Accordingly, when the priest exits the sanctuary, the southern base is the first one that he encounters. This would suggest that the entrance of the sanctuary, right, this is maybe not fully centered, right, and that somehow the entrance is a little bit more toward the south, and that's why he would encounter the southern edge of the altar, according to this explanation. Now we're on page 53b. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, says both this and that, i.e. the blood of an inner sin offering and that of an external sin offering were poured at the western base of the altar. According to this version, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai agrees with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara comments, and your mnemonic to remember this change in opinion is the men pulled the man. In this case, the numerous students of Rabbi Yishmael claim that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai agrees with their teacher. It sounds like we didn't really resolve that because, and I say we didn't really resolve that because we just finished our discussion of Mishnah number 2. We now move on to Mishnah number 3, the next kind of offerings in descending level of sanctity. The burnt offering is an offering of the most sacred order. Its slaughter is in the north of the temple courtyard, and the collection of its blood in a service vessel is in the north, and its blood requires 2 placements that are 4, and it requires flaying of the carcass and the cutting of the sacrificial animal into pieces, and it is consumed in its entirety, with the exception of its hide, by the fire of the altar. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. What is the reason that the Tana who is speaking, right, the anonymous Tana who is speaking in this Mishnah, what is the reason that the Tana taught that a burnt offering is an offering of the most sacred order, when the Mishnah that we just read about sin offerings did not mention that a sin offering is of the most sacred order? In fact, even more sacred than a burnt offering. And yet, that Mishnah about sin offerings didn't mention that a sin offering is an offering of the most sacred order. And now it does say that about the burnt offering. Why? And the Gemara answers, it is because in the Torah, it is not written explicitly with regard to the burnt offering that it is most sacred, as it does state concerning the sin offering. And the guilt offering in a verse concerning a meal offering, it shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as the portion of my offerings made by fire. It is most sacred as the sin offering and as the guilt offering, right? So both the sin offering and the guilt offering, the Torah says explicitly about them, they are most sacred. It doesn't say that about the burnt offering. Consequently, the Tana explicitly states that a burnt offering is likewise of the most sacred order. The Torah didn't say so how do we know that a burnt offering is of the most sacred order? Must be that they derive that from all the requirements and the way that we learn out how to bring sin offerings and guilt offerings from the way that burnt offerings are brought. If they are most sacred, how could they be deriving their procedures from an offering that is not of that same level of sanctity? Now the Mishnah teaches, and its blood requires 2, but since it didn't say it explicitly, the Tana of the Mishnah made sure that we knew by including it in that Mishnah. Now the Mishnah, this Mishnah number 3, teaches, and its blood requires 2 placements that are 4, right? So we're going to hit all 4 sides of the altar, but we're going to do it in 2 placements. How so? He's going to sprinkle on one corner, and then he's going to go to the diagonally opposite corner, and he's going to hit 2 sides. And when he hits 2 sides at each of these 2 opposite corners, that will hit all 4 sides of the altar. But he's doing it in 2 sprinklings, as opposed to the sin offering, where he's supposed to do 4 sprinklings. And its blood requires 2 placements that are 4. How does the priest perform the placements? Rav says he places the blood on one side of the corner of the altar and places it again on the other side of the corner of the altar, and he repeats this on the diagonally opposite corner, so that he places on 2 corners but on all 4 sides of the altar. And Shmuel says he places 1 placement on each of the 2 diagonally opposite corners so that each placement is similar to the shape of the Greek letter gamma, which is sort of like an upside down L, capital L, and it has a right angle in it. Now, the Gemara comments that the dispute between Rav and Shmuel is like a dispute between Tanaim, sages of the Mishnah. One might have thought that a priest should sprinkle 1 sprinkling with the blood of a burnt offering. You might have thought that. To counter this possibility, the verse states, and sprinkle the blood around against the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting, in Leviticus 1:5. If the blood must be sprinkled around the altar, one might have thought that he should circumscribe the altar as one would do with a thread and sprinkle the blood all around. And to counter this possibility, the verse states, shall present the blood and sprinkle the blood against the altar. And one cannot have the blood circumscribe the altar as a thread without directly applying it with a finger. So how can these verses be reconciled? He applies the blood in a shape that is similar to that of the Greek letter gamma, and its blood requires 2 sprinklings that are 4. This opinion accords with the opinion of Shmuel. So it's like, if this is, overhead view, the corner of the altar, when he gets to the corner, he's going to go with his finger, right? Boom, boom, right? So he's going to trace some blood around the corner. So now he's hit 2 sides. Then he's going to go diagonally opposite to the other corner and do the same thing again with his finger, hit both sides. Right? This is it's more vertical, so he's walking around this ledge. He gets there and he goes boom, right? And then he goes all the way around to the other catty corner, does that same thing again, if you can follow what I'm saying. This opinion accords with the opinion of Shmuel. Yeah. So the Brisa continues. Rabbi Yishmael says, it is stated here, shall present the blood and sprinkle the blood around against the altar, in Leviticus 1:5. And it is stated there with regard to the sin offering sacrificed at the inauguration of the tabernacle, one time in history when the tabernacle was inaugurated in the desert by Moses. And when it was slain, Moses took the blood and put it upon the corners of the altar round with his finger. Leviticus 8:15. So just as there, with regard to the sin offering, the blood was placed discreetly and with 4 placements, 1 on each corner, so too here, with regard to a burnt offering, it must be placed discreetly and with 4 placements. This opinion accords with the opinion of Rav. If these offerings are compared to each other, why not say that just as there, the blood of the sin offering must have 4 placements on the 4 corners, so too here, the blood of the burnt offering requires 4 placements on the 4 corners, right? For the sin offering, we said he has to hit all 4 corners and then, be on the edge or within a cubit of each 4 corners. Why do we say now with the burnt offering, he's going to hit all 4 sides of the altar, but he's going to do it in 2 sprinklings, making sure to hit 2 sides at each of those corners that are opposite each other? Why don't we just say he has to hit all 4 corners for a burnt offering? Answer, you said that a burnt offering requires that the blood be placed on a part of the altar that has a base, and the southeast corner of the altar had no base beneath it. Therefore, the blood had to be placed on the northeast corner and the southwest corner. When we say requires a base, you would think, well, why would they not have a base around the whole altar? Why would there be missing sections of that base? Let's keep reading. So the Gemara asks, what was the reason that there was no base on the southeast corner of the altar? As a matter of fact, it is here. It is shown. I don't know if you can see this, but you can see. So here is the altar. Okay, and if you look closely, there is a base here and here, but there is no base down here and here, right? The base is only from here to here to here, right? So this is northeast, and this is northwest, and this is southwest. But over here, where it's the southeast corner, there is no base, even in my little wood model. Why? Why was there no base in the southeast corner? Rabbi Lazar says, because it was not in the portion of land of the one who tears. What? I.e. the tribe of Benjamin, as he is described in the following manner in Genesis 49:27, which is where Jacob blesses his children at the end of his life, right? He's on his deathbed, and he blesses his 12 sons. And what does he say about Benjamin? Benjamin is a wolf that tears apart. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. As Rav Shmuel, the son of Rav Yitzchak, says, the altar would consume, i.e. occupy 1 cubit of the portion of Judah. The part of the altar in Judah's portion was the southeast corner of the base, and therefore there was no base on that corner. Right, so very interesting. Should have brought this in earlier. I don't know if this particular... I know we have it in the stone humish inside. I don't think that this particular... This is pretty cool, right? This is how the tabernacle looked in the wilderness. I haven't seen this illustration before. Very nice. And here's a nice little illustration of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem and what we're talking about. Now you can start to grasp a little bit the scale, right? It's much, much larger than the tabernacle was. You can see a little bit. Those tiny little things are people. And this is the second temple, like our model, right? So much, it's not quite as not nearly as tall as the Temple of Solomon. The second temple was more modest than the first temple. But what I want to get at is just a map of Israel and the tribes, which I'm probably not going to find right now. The point is that, like we have states in America, you had tribal portions in the ancient land of Israel. We still know where they are today. And there's when you go to Israel, there are signs, where are you? Are you in Judah or Judea, right? Are you, which would be, right, Yehuda, right, the tribal portion of Judah? Or are you in Benjamin, right, the tribal portion of Benjamin? Or Shimon is a little bit complicated, but then there's other areas like, Dan and Naphtali and Zebulun and Issachar. All right, so there were geographic regions. The point is that the temple, the Holy Temple, a little bit like Washington, D.C., right, is between Virginia and Maryland. The temple was kind of split between Judea or Yehuda, right, Judah and Benjamin. So you could say that parts of the temple were in Judah and parts were in Benjamin, and that border even cut through where the altar was standing. Okay, so since Benjamin had this blessing that he would be like a devouring wolf, sort of spiritually, metaphorically, the sages are going to say that's why the altar needed to be in Benjamin. Right, because the altar devours all the offerings, right? Again, metaphorically, like a wolf devours kosher animals. Right? A wolf eats sheep. A wolf eats goats. A wolf eats calves of bulls. And likewise, the altar consumes offerings of those animals. And so the altar has to be there. But part of the altar has to be in Judah, right? In Judea. Which is the tribe from which the royalty came, right? David, King David, is a descendant of Judah. The scepter shall not go out from Judah. Okay, so let's keep reading. Benjamin is a wolf that tears apart. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. Right, morning and evening there were offerings on the altar. As Rav Shmuel, the son of Rav Yitzchak, says, the altar would consume, i.e. occupy 1 cubit of the portion of Judah. The part of the altar in Judah's portion was the southeast corner of the base, and therefore there was no base in that corner. Rabbi Levi Bar Chama says that Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says a strip of land emerged from the portion of Judah and entered into the portion of Benjamin, and the southeast corner of the base was on that strip. And the tribe of Benjamin, the righteous, would agonize over it every day, desiring to take it into their portion due to its unique sanctity, as it is stated in Moses' blessing to the tribe of Benjamin, right? So Jacob blessed the tribes on his death, right, when he died in Egypt, at the beginning of the Jewish sojourn in Egypt. Moses, when he died, right, many years later, hundreds of years later, after he led the children of Israel out of Egypt and then around the wilderness for 40 years, and then shortly before dying, he gave blessings to the children of Israel, who are now tribes, right? But so his blessing was for whole tribes, whereas Jacob was for his sons and their descendants, which would be the tribes. So on top of 54a, Moses said about Benjamin, he covers it throughout the day and he dwells between his shoulders, right? What does that mean? It's kind of ambiguous. So the term covers it is understood to mean that Benjamin is continually focused upon the site. Therefore, Benjamin the righteous was privileged and became the host of the Holy One, blessed be he, as the Holy of Holies was built in his portion, as it is stated, and he dwells between his shoulders. Now the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa. How was the rite of a bird burnt offering performed? The priest ascended the ramp and turned to the surrounding ledge. When he arrived at the southeast corner, the priest would pinch the bird's head by pinching its nape with his thumbnail and sever the bird's head from its body, and he would squeeze out its blood on the wall of the altar. Again, he's on that ledge. He's not on top of the altar. He's on that ledge that goes around it, which he can walk around and hit these corners when he has to sprinkle blood. With a bird offering, he's going to need to be below the red line. And so now the Gemara explains how this is an objection to what was being said earlier. And if you say that the southeast corner of the altar had no base, is he merely performing the rite in the air and not within the domain of the altar? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak say that when Eretz Yisrael was apportioned, and when they apportioned the parts of the Holy Land to the tribes, they made this condition: the airspace of what would become the southeast part of the altar is in the portion of the tribe of Benjamin, so that the pinching of the bird offering was performed within the domain of the altar. But the land was in the portion of the tribe of Judah. It sounds like the way they had to make compromises in order to locate Washington, D.C. There were political ramifications of which tribe was going to host the Holy Temple. And it sounds like they're saying, okay, well, it's like the airspace belongs to Benjamin and the land belongs to Judah when we're talking about the very specific place of the altar itself. Okay, new topic. The Gemara asks, what does the Baraisa mean when it states that the southeast corner of the altar had no base? So Rav says it is with regard to the fact that it had no base built on those sides. Levi says it is with regard to the fact that no blood was sprinkled on that side, as the blood was not permitted to be presented there, even though there was a physical base. Based on this dispute, each of them disagreed as to the correct Aramaic translation of the verse, Benjamin is a wolf that tears apart. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. Again, from Genesis 49:27. So Rav translates this into Aramaic as, in his portion will the altar be built. Levi translates this as, in his portion will the sanctuary be built, which means a place sanctified for blood, receiving the sprinkling of the blood. So now the Gemara brings a proof for each of these opinions. Come in here a proof for the explanation of Rav from a Mishna and Tractate Midos. The base of the altar would extend along all of the northern side and along all of the western side. It consumed 1 cubit on the southern side and 1 cubit on the eastern side. And this indicates that there was no base on most of the southern and eastern sides of the altar. And the Gemara comments, Levi would explain, what is the meaning of the term consume? The Baraisa as well is stated with regard to consuming blood of the offerings, right? They're saying, earlier they said the altar consumes a, geographic portion of Judah or of Benjamin, but here the understanding of consume is that the altar is consuming the offerings that are burned on it and the blood that is sprinkled on it. Again, metaphorically. The Gemara suggests, come in here, a proof for the explanation of Levi from the same Mishnah. The altar was 32 cubits by 32 cubits. Okay, that's a big altar. Much, much bigger than the altar in the wilderness, which had to be carried from place to place by people carrying it. There, 4 cubits by 4 cubits, right, 6 foot by 6 foot, that's already pretty big, right, for this wooden altar, I think copper plated, to be carried from one place to another. Maybe they were able to label. Maybe the altar could be loaded on a wagon, but still, it's not going to be much bigger than 6 foot by 6 foot. But the altar made of stones, once the temple was built, was much, much bigger. 32 cubits by 32 cubits. Okay, now we're talking about something that's almost 50 feet by 50 feet. Much bigger. And this indicates that there was a base on all 4 sides in accordance with the opinion of Levi. And Rav could answer, here we're dealing with the measurement from the side. In other words, only the northern and western sides were 32 cubits in length. So the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof for the explanation of Levi from a Baraisa. It turns out the top of the ramp of the altar would overhang 1 cubit in the air over the base of the altar and 1 cubit over the surrounding edge. And this indicates that it had a base on all 4 sides, as the ramp was on the southern side. Like the ramp was acting as the base, right? So Rav could answer, say that the Brisa means that it would overhang toward the place where the base of the cubit would have been. The base of the altar would have been, and 1 cubit over the surrounding ledge. The ledge is what the priests use to walk around, halfway up the altar so they can hit above or below that red line. Now, the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof. As Levi teaches in a Baraisa, how does one build the altar? He brings a square wooden frame, which is 32 cubits by 32 cubits, and its height is 1 cubit. And he brings pieces of damp stone, both large and small, which are the main components of the altar, which is described as an altar of stone. And he brings plaster and molten lead and tar and melts them and pours the mixture into the gaps between the stones. And this is the place of the base of the altar. And then he brings a square wooden frame, which is 30 cubits by 30 cubits. And its height is 5 cubits. And he brings pieces of damp stone, both large and small. And he brings plaster and molten lead and tar and melts them and pours the mixture in the gaps between the stones. And then he brings a square wooden frame, which is 28 cubits by 28 cubits. In other words, it's like there's a base like this, up 1 cubit, then it's a little bit smaller, then 5 cubits, then a little smaller, right? It's a little bit of a pyramid. It's not, we're not going to a point. There's going to be a big flat surface on top, but it narrows a little bit twice as you get up towards the full height of the altar. So 32 cubits at the bottom, at the base, then 30 cubits, then 28 cubits till you get to the top, and that is the place of the arrangement. So it sounds like the ledge is where it's 30 cubits, and then the top is 28 cubits. And then he brings a square wooden frame, which is 1 cubit by 1 cubit, and he brings pieces of damp stone, both large and small. He brings plaster and molten lead and tar and melts them and pours the mixture into the frame. And this is how he makes the corner of the altar. And there's going to be 4 corners. So he does this for each and every corner. And the Baraisa indicates that the altar had a base around all 4 sides, right? The bottom layer, 32 by 32. And the Gemara comments, and if you would say that he cuts the base on the southern and western sides after he has poured the mixture for the altar and it has dried, it is written concerning the altar, you shall build the altar of the Lord your God of unhewn stones, and you shall offer burnt offerings on it to the Lord your God, so it cannot be cut. I guess I was wrong about the altar in the wilderness. Maybe they had to build it out of stones everywhere where they brought the tabernacle. I thought they built an altar though. But you know what? The altar has to be made of stone, so I must have been wrong about that. What they did carry from place to place, was the incense altar, which is made of gold, and obviously the Ark of the Covenant, the table of the showbreads, the menorah, etc. But I guess probably they rebuilt a new altar in each place. But it wasn't this big, like it was eventually when the temple was built. Okay, now we're on page 54b. So Rav could answer, this means that he places something under the frame in the place where there is to be no base, and after the poured mixture is dried, he removes it, leaving the space empty, right? So wood frame 32 by 32, but on two of the edges, instead of just a thin wood frame, there's a 1 cubit spacer. And if you do not say so, or 2 cubit space, I think 1 cubit. And if you do not say so, how will you explain that which Rav Kahana says, the stone interiors of the corners were hollow? I.e., there were gaps between the stones, as it is written, and they shall be filled like the basins, like the corners of the altar, in Zechariah 9:15. So the verse compares the corners to hollow basins. Well, here too, doesn't the Merciful One state that the altar must be made of unhewn stones? If so, how could the corners be hollow? Rather, it must be that he places something, for example, sticks and twigs, under the frame and pours the mixture for the corners over it, and when it has hardened, he removes the sticks and twigs, leaving the corners somewhat hollow. Here too, he places something under the frame and later removes it. Apropos the altar and the temple, the Gemara relates that Rava taught, what is the meaning of that which is written concerning David, quote, and he and Samuel went and dwelt in Nios. And it was told to Saul, saying, behold, David is at Nios in Ramah. That's 1 Samuel 19, verses 18 and 19. But what does Nios have to do with Ramah? So they are two distinct places. So rather, this means that they were sitting in Ramah and were involved in discussing the beauty, benoyo, of the world, by which they meant the temple, right? The most beautiful thing in the world is the temple, which had not been built yet, right? There was only a tabernacle at the time that David was alive. It would not be built until he died, and his son King Solomon built it. But David was obsessed with building the holy temple. He wanted to do it. He selected the place for it, begged God to let him build the temple, and God said, no, it won't be for you. Your son will build it. So David and Samuel said, it is written, then you shall arise and get you up onto the place which the Lord your God shall choose. Deuteronomy 17:8. And this teaches that the temple is higher than all places in Eretz Yisrael. And Eretz Yisrael is higher than all countries. They did not know where the highest place in Eretz Yisrael was, but wherever they put the temple was spiritually obviously going to be the highest place. I don't think that the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is physically the highest point in Israel. There are mountains in Israel that are probably higher. But spiritually, of course, it's the highest place on earth. So they brought the book of Joshua. And with regard to all of the borders of the tribes, it is written, and went down. See Joshua 15:10, 16:3, 17:9. And it is written, and the border went up to Beis Hoglah. In Joshua 15:6, and the border was drawn from the top of the mountain to the fountain of the waters of Nephtoah. In Joshua 15:9, and the verse uses different terms to describe the borders of the portion of each tribe. And with regard to the borders of the tribe of Benjamin, it is written only, and went up, in Joshua 18:11, but it is not written, and went down. And so they said, conclude from the verses that the temple's place is here, in the portion of Benjamin. Right? Even though David was from the tribe of Judah, he says it must be that the temple is basically going to be in Benjamin, because in the book of Joshua, it describes going up and not going down. So it's like spiritually it is the highest. So they thought to build it in Ain Etam, which is higher than any other place in the portion of Benjamin. And they said, let us lower it a bit, as it is written, he covers it throughout the day, and he dwells between his shoulders. This indicates that the temple is situated slightly lower between two peaks. And if you wish, say instead that it is learned as a tradition that the Sanhedrin is to be located in the portion of Judah, and the place of the divine presence is to be located in the portion of Benjamin. And they said, and if we raise it and place it near Ain Etam, it will be too distant from the portion of Yehuda. So they said it is preferable that we lower it a bit, as it is written, he covers it throughout the day and he dwells between its shoulders. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And with regard to this matter, that David and Samuel discovered the location of the temple, Doeg the Edomite was jealous of David, as it is written, because jealousy for your house has eaten me up. Psalm 69 verse 10. And it is written, Lord, remember for David all his affliction, how he swore to the Lord and vowed unto the mighty one of Jacob, I will not come into the tent of my house, nor go up into the bed that is spread for me, if I will give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. That's Psalm 132, verses 1 through 5. Right, David's obsession with at least placing the temple. He wouldn't merit to build it, but he did choose the location, I guess in consultation with the prophet Samuel. Now, the verse following those verses states, right, Psalm 132, verse 6, we heard of it as being in Ephrat, and we found it on the field of the wood. Rav explains the meaning of those words. In Ephrat, this is a reference to Joshua, who came from the tribe of Ephraim, one of Joseph's sons. And this alludes to the fact that David and Samuel, were able to locate the highest place in Eretz Yisrael based on the book of Joshua. We found it in the field of the wood. This is a reference to Benjamin, as it is written concerning him, Benjamin is a wolf that tears apart, in the morning devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. A wolf is a wild animal living in the field. And David and Shmuel found the location of the temple in the portion of Benjamin. That's how the temple ended up being situated where it was situated. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 5. We'll pick it up tomorrow with the Mishnah number 4, which discusses the communal peace offerings and guilt offerings. I'll take a few comments. Sharon, is the altar cleaned between sacrifices? If not, might they not have difficulties identifying one set of sprinkling from another, especially after multiple sacrifices? Okay, so you're talking about the corners being clean. What an interesting question, as opposed to the altar pyre on top. It was made of stone, porous stone. So are you saying that because it wasn't cleaned, they might not know, a priest might lose track of whether he has sprinkled or not because he can't see the blood that he's sprinkling now? I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard that they would need to do a cleaning. I don't even know if they could do a cleaning. Right, they're just putting blood on the stone. Some of it gets absorbed, it dries. I don't know that they're cleaning it would suggest that they need to remove this sacred blood that needed to be placed on the altar, right? And I mean, we've already learned that it would have to be an exceptionally, tough situation for us to take something off the altar that had already been placed there. Even if it never should have been placed on the altar in the first place, it's only when some really big rule has been violated that having placed it there will take it off. Now, we're talking about offerings themselves on the altar pyre, but as a general principle, we're not going to remove something once it ascends on the altar. And since the sprinkling is, if it's being done properly, we're not going to remove blood by cleaning it, right? So I don't think there was cleanings like that. Daryl says, why is the blood so important? Fantastic question, right? Why is it that the blood affects the purpose of bringing an offering, right? The actual blood being sprinkled on the altar, as opposed to the animal being consumed either by the fire of the altar or by the priest or by the owner of the offering, depending on what kind of offering we're talking about. Why is it the actual, either fulfilling a vow to bring an offering or effecting atonement if the offering was brought to achieve an atonement? Why is it that the blood does that? So first answer is because God said so. All these laws, we don't really understand them. We are encouraged by Rambam, among many others, to try to figure it out and to offer a rationale why these laws that are given to us are, constructed the way that they're constructed, with the full humble awareness that we cannot know. We cannot know the mind of God. And so we might, guess why God gives us these laws. Sometimes God tells us why, usually not. And so therefore we do it because God said so. Having said that, God is also telling us that we don't consume blood, right? Jews are prohibited to eat blood. So even though we eat meat, which is necessarily going to have some blood in it, we do our best to remove all the blood that is possible to remove from the animal. Why? Because the blood is the life, right? The Torah says that the blood is the life, right? When you shecht an animal, when you slaughter an animal, the way that you kill it, right? The cut on the throat doesn't kill the animal. The blood pouring out, bleeding out, is what takes the life of the animal. So the blood represents the life, right? It's the life. And so one of the lessons could be that, bringing these offerings, ascending to Jerusalem, coming near. These offerings are called korbanos, which means coming near. Same root word as coming near, right? And so it's to tell you that this is very serious business, so to speak. It's telling you that you've got to come near to God. You've got to bring your best to God as an offering to God. God doesn't need our barbecue, right? He doesn't need us to kill these animals and burn them on the altar. God doesn't need that, right? He's doing that for our benefit, so that when we make a sacrifice, when we take something that is valuable of ours, whether it's our money or our time, right, and we dedicate it to the work of God and to coming close to God and to, coming near means, in prayer, in charitable giving, in making atonement, right? It's really trying to better ourselves and become that man or woman that we're destined to be. All of this, right, refines us. Following God's law, submitting our will to God's will, is going to elevate us and bring us to a new level, right? It's so interesting that you got to serve somebody, as Bob Dylan says, and really better be God, right? If you fear only God, you won't have to fear other people, and you will, elevate yourself constantly. And I think that the blood represents all of that, and it tells you that this is our life, right? The Torah, the commandments are a lifeline. They are a lifeline, and we live by them, right? And we see many places in the Talmud that it says the commandments are given to us to live by them, not to die for them. There's only 3 times that we would die for laws of the Torah. That's rather than, if somebody says, go commit murder or I'm going to kill you, then we're going to die for it because we're not going to go commit murder. Go rape that woman or I'm going to kill you. Then we accept to be killed. And go commit idolatry and bow to fake gods. That's going to be maybe a little bit harder, but that's one where we are commanded to accept death rather than commit idolatry. Everything else, no. You need to live by the commandments, and so if it's going to cost you your life, you don't do it. So that's, the beginnings of an answer of why the blood is so important. Lucy, I understand that the sacrifice of an animal stood for the sacrifice of one's own self, and the pouring of the blood stood for the pouring of one's life to God. Do we know what meaning the people attach to the complex, precisely ordained pourings and sprinklings in various locations during the sacrificial ritual? So I think you're asking me, so metaphorically, why are we hitting 2 corners? Or why are we hitting 4 corners? Why are we above the red line? Why are we below the red line? I think, there probably are, spiritual, metaphorical meanings that we could take to that could be very elevating and inspiring. I don't know any offhand. But I would say that spiritually speaking, the fact that overall, it's just like you said, and what I was just saying, right? This coming near, elevating ourselves, dedicating ourselves to God's service, it's just going to require a lot of details, right? In the military, there's a gazillion rules that they have to follow, right? Not all of them are making them better fighters, more capable of defending the country in an obvious way, right? Making your body strong, making it so you can shoot accurately, making it so you can pilot a plane that's going to deliver, soldiers and ordnance to the needed place where the battle is being fought. Those things are obvious, making the army stronger. But, having their brass buttons shiny and their beds, made with tight corners of the sheets, etc., how is that making the military stronger? Answer, because it requires full-time dedication and submitting to the will of the armed force all day long. And so we don't necessarily need specific spiritual meanings for every detail, but we do need details for how to perform every major action. That's how I would answer that question. Right, so Karen says, wasn't the altar in the wilderness made of acacia wood plated with copper? See, I thought it was. That's why I'm now confused. I think maybe the stones only comes into play when we're talking about the holy altar in the altar in the holy temple, once it was built of stone, etc. Right, and no iron ever came to cut those stones. The stones were cut without cutting implements. So I think you're right? The altar in the wilderness, they had to carry it from place to place. They didn't build a new one every time. This is such a basic thing. I'm so embarrassed that I just don't say obviously. But I think, they did build an altar, exactly, of wood covered in copper. That was the altar they carried with them. Then when there were private altars, during those short periods, those had to be made of stone. And then when they finally had the Holy Temple, for sure, the altar was made of stone. So that answers the question. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.